It's been an absolute roller coaster of a season so far for the Florida Gators. We're going to talk about that and the path to bowl eligibility here on Locked On Gators.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to podcasts. Happy Friday. I'm Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Whole Nine Sports, Giants Country, NFL 33. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. And right now, new customers bet $5, get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. That's going to come in clutch during NBA season. I'm just saying, throw a few of those bonus bets. Throw a few of those bonus bet dollars on first basket, maybe first basket parlay. Whew, baby, now we're talking. But the Florida Gators right now, so far, they've got a 5-2 record. One win away from bowl eligibility. Prior to the season, I had said that my expectation for this team was 6 or 7 wins. And I realized that having 5 wins with 5 games remaining makes it sound really easy, but I want to make this clear, my expectation is still 7 wins. Maybe you can push me for 8, but I'm still with 6, 7 is like the expected, maybe 8 here. But we knew going into it that the first half of this schedule was going to be not easy, but easier than the second half, because the second half of the schedule for the Gators here is absolutely brutal. There are very few Gators fans who are genuinely surprised that, oh, the Florida Gators have 5 wins at this point in the year. Nobody thought that. That was how a lot of Florida Gators fans thought that we would go. In fact, there were quite a few Florida Gators fans that said, hey, we'd be 6-1 heading into the Georgia game. Obviously, that didn't happen. But I think when you look at the first half of this schedule, it kind of went as expected for the most part. I think most of us thought that Utah would at least be a closer game. Like I said prior to the game, I was like, I think Florida wins. I know it's going to be a close game. And it wasn't that close of a game because Florida did not show up whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. But then you look at after that, and it was McNeese State, we knew would be a win. Charlotte, we knew would be a win. Then you had Tennessee, was a game where quite a few people were iffy on, but never really bought in on them. Which, by the way, Florida, their only loss to this point. Just want to throw that one out there. That is right now, Tennessee's only loss is the Florida game. That's at least kind of impressive. Like, I do want to talk about that one for a second, because I know that the Locked On college hosts, we do our Locked On Top 25 voting polls. And prior to the Florida game, Tennessee was number 11. Tennessee was number 11 or maybe number 12 in the country. And Florida was unranked. And Florida beat Tennessee, and then Florida didn't get ranked. And I gave them so much hell for that, publicly and in the group chat. And their response was, well, Tennessee never should have been ranked that high to begin with. Still their only loss, because they were, Tennessee is so overrated. Still their only loss. Just want to throw that one out there. But it was always going to be the first half of the schedule was going to be easier. Utah was favored. Utah won. After that, a lot of us thought the Tennessee game would be a win. A lot of us thought McNeese State, Charlotte would be wins. And then if you've been listening to Locked On Gators, pretty much, since May? April-ish? I'd been saying I expect Florida to split those games. Said I expect Florida to split Kentucky and South Carolina. Because one, they were road games, and history tells me Florida's not winning both of those games under Billy Napier. Two, Kentucky knows how to show up whenever Florida goes into Kentucky. South Carolina had a revenge game. So I was like, okay, that leads to you probably splitting those. And I even said Kentucky is the one that's more likely for Florida to lose. And yeah, I didn't think they'd lose that bad. But that was the game where I was like, all right, Florida probably goes in there and loses on the road, 5-2 heading into this break. So the first half of the season has gone kind of as expected record-wise. Maybe not performance on the field-wise and not individual performance, certainly wise. But as far as the team goes, 5 wins was kind of the expectation. I will say, because we're going to spend the rest of this show talking about the last half of that schedule, but I'm going to tell you now, the reason that I've said, hey, 6 or 7 wins, maybe 8 is the expectation, is because I'm not looking at this going, oh, Florida has 5 wins at this point in the season. They're definitely winning 2, 3, maybe 4 of them, because that's silly. But especially when you look at this team has been so wildly inconsistent. Like they just have been. And that's going to happen with a young team. However, I'm not just going to go, oh, the bye weeks where they put it all together. So I think that that's where I land on. I think that this team wins 1 to 3 more games tops. If they get to 9 wins, hell of a job. But I don't think that happens. I think there's one game in the second half where I say, all right, Florida should go into that one favored, and Florida should win that game. Which again, we'll talk. It's Arkansas. That's nothing new here. But this is a second half of the schedule that's brutal. Next year, the entire schedule for the Gators is brutal. But right now, when you look at the first half, this was the expectation. Florida is not exceeding expectations. They're not falling short of expectations. They're performing record-wise as expected. Again, on field has been very different, but record-wise, they're performing as expected. So I think that's where I look at, 5 wins was the expectation at this point. I think that they're still going to remain with the expectation of 6 or 7. Again, like I said, maybe 8, but I'm still looking at 6 or 7 as the most likely outcomes here. We're about to talk about the Georgia game, which is the next game that the Florida Gators play, and the Arkansas game. But before we talk about those, today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by BetterHelp. Give online therapy a try at betterhelp.com/lockedoncollege and get on your way to being your best self. Whether you're dealing with decisions around your career, relationships, being a Florida Gators fan, if you're like me, dealing with being a Gators and Giants and Mets and Knicks fan, life is rough with sports, okay? Therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate life so that you can move forward with confidence and excitement, and it's entirely online. BetterHelp is designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule, so let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedoncollege to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/lockedoncollege. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is also brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. Throw it on something crazy. Why not? It's $5 and you're getting 200 in bonus bets. Just throw it on something wild. Maybe it hits. And if it doesn't, if it does hit, congratulations. You won a crazy amount. If it doesn't, you still get 200 in bonus bets. I'm just saying. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. You got the MLB postseason. You've got the NFL. You've got college football. You've got the NBA coming back. You've got NHL. You've got soccer's always going on places. So I'm just saying, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season right. Remember that FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to podcasts. like I mentioned last segment and like we talked about prior to the season, the second half of this Florida Gators schedule is gonna suck. Okay? But again, that was what we expected. The big reason that people were like, "Oh, the Florida Gators need to get off to a hot start," is because we can see the writing on the wall that the second half of the schedule was not going to be fun. It was not going to be easy. And I'm sorry if you're a Florida Gators fan that was expecting, "Oh, we won 5 games in the first half. Who's to say we can't win, 4 in the second?" I'm not saying you can't. But if that's your expectation, buddy, you're in for a rough one. Because I just again I don't see it. I don't see it. Every game is winnable, and I don't just mean on Florida's schedule. If you've watched this show long enough, or if you're a listener and you're not a viewer, then I will never definitively say this is a win. You look at McNeese State, and I was like, hey, this should be a win. But I'm not going to count anything, especially with the Samford game a couple years ago. I'm not definitively saying anything. But every game is winnable. And for the Florida Gators on the back half of your schedule, every game is winnable. Georgia, of course, is the least likely game to win. And I know that Georgia's had quite a few moments where you watch them play and you go, this isn't the Georgia that we've been used to the past couple years. And that's fair and that's true. However, this is still a Georgia team that is just chock full of 5-star talent, legitimate, high-ranking blue chip talent. And this is a Florida Gators program that is still in the midst of their rebuild. Maybe they're a little bit ahead of schedule, but they've still got work to do. And this is a loaded Georgia roster. So, yes, Florida does have a chance to win this game. But realistically, the expectation should not be a win. The goal, yes. The expectation, no. Even without Brock Bowers for Georgia, who, yeah, he's going to miss the game. I know he's expected to maybe not play any more college football, just go to the NFL draft after this and not risk further injury. We'll go more in depth on the game specifically next week because the game is 8 days from today. If you're watching or listening on the day this comes out on Friday, October 20th. But even without Brock Bowers, this is a game that Georgia's probably going to win. They've got a hell of a team. Florida is wildly inconsistent. That's what we know. Like, that's the thing that we know about Florida. That do not fully expect anything because you don't know which team is going to show up. So let's say you lose the Georgia game. You're 5-3 with 4 games remaining. Still need one win to get to bowl eligibility, and I think that the Gators get it November 4th when they host Arkansas. And I will say, going into this season, I don't have the clip, but I fully remember me saying that I thought Arkansas matched up well with Florida. On paper, going into the season, Arkansas was a pretty damn good football team on paper. Then they've been surprisingly bad this year. And I don't mean, oh, yeah, like I could have seen them going 500. They're 2-5. Okay. On paper, this team should have been better than they were last year. And they've lost a lot of close games. That's the important part, too, because you can be a bad football team or have a bad record or whatever, but this is an Arkansas team. Like, it's funny to me. They've got 2 wins and 5 losses, but they still have a point differential of about plus 40. So they've lost 5 games, but their 2 wins were enough to cover that by over 40 because their losses have been close. This is a team where, like I've said about Florida, they're just not the team to get blown out. Also important to remember that when Arkansas comes to Gainesville and they play Florida, Arkansas will be coming off a bye and Florida will be coming off the Georgia game. Those are 2 pretty drastic approaches to be taking to this, because Arkansas is going to have 2 weeks to prep for it. Florida would have just spent 2 weeks prepping for Georgia, getting into an absolute war. I don't care who wins or how. Obviously, I care who wins, but I don't care who wins this game. I don't care what the score is, if it's close or a blowout. This game, the Georgia game, is going to be physical as hell. And so Florida's going to be like, all right, we had 2 weeks off to mentally prepare for this. Physically, we get into a war, and then we have to go against Arkansas. Whereas Arkansas will have had 2 weeks off to get healthy, 2 weeks off to prep and game plan for this game. Florida is going to win this game, I believe. But I am going to say that it's looking rough, but I think Florida will win this game. The realistic expectation for these next 2 games should be that Florida will lose to Georgia, but cover the spread. I forgot, it's like 23.5 or something insane like that. Florida will likely lose to Georgia and cover the spread. Florida should and likely will beat Arkansas. But this is still like one of those times where we look at this, and I still think schematically Arkansas matches up rather well with Florida. However, if Graham Mertz and the receivers play the way they did against South Carolina, then you can handle Arkansas. And I mean handle Arkansas. So I think that for Florida, you can go through game 9 and be bowl eligible. I think by November 4th, we'll say midnight Eastern, the Florida Gators should be bowl eligible. And that should be the expectation if you're a Florida Gators fan. Not, maybe, no. The expectation should be that by November 4th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time, you're looking at a bowl eligible Florida Gators team. Which, again, for me, that's the goal. If you hit bowl eligibility, this year's not a loss. Despite all the offensive coordinator, all the Graham Mertz, all of any complaints people have had, if you hit bowl eligibility, this season is you reached your expectation. Not your ceiling, but you reached your expectation. And so we can't fault you too much for the on-field product at that point. Because you've looked really good at times, you looked really bad at times. But I think that once you hit that 6th win, which should be November 4th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time, you're looking at you've exceeded, like you've got your expectations, you've got your bowl practices, maintain your recruiting class, and you're looking at a successful, positive year for the Florida Gators in year 2 under Billy Napier. But at that point, there's still 3 more games to be played. And we're going to talk about those in just a second. But before we talk about those, if you're watching or listening and you haven't worn bird dogs yet, I don't know what kind of life choices you're making. I'll just say that. Bird dogs are easily the most comfortable shorts that I've ever worn and are the most versatile shorts that I've ever worn. Their stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg to give you a truly sculpted look. And you know how we do it here. It's skies out, thighs out, baby. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or enter promo code lockedoncollege for a free water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or promo code lockedoncollege for a free water bottle. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you. And also, fellas, have you ever had trouble performing? Lights too bright? You ever out with your partner and you just feel like you can't get the job done? Does it get worse when there are lots of people around? Is it especially bad with guacamole? I'm talking about weak chips, the ones that can't handle a single scoop of guac. Well, here at Zach's Mighty Tortilla Chips, we understand the pain of trying to dip with weak tortilla chips, and no one wants to go soft on the guac, right? Unlike other chips, Zach's Mighty Tortilla Chips are literally built to dip. They're made the old-fashioned way by cutting actual tortillas, and Zach's Mighty Tortilla Chips are both sturdy and delicious. What's not to like? Zach's Mighty Tortilla Chips are now available at Publix in sea salt, lime, and nacho flavors, and you can find them in the deli section with the dips. Head on over to Publix, grab a bag of Zach's Mighty, and scoop that guac like the stud that you are. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast. Now, also, if you haven't joined the Locked On Gators Discord, links in the description below. If you aren't yet a Locked On Gators insider with subtext, the link is in the description below. It's 2 weeks free, $5 a month. After that, you get one-on-one conversation with me. We'll talk during games and post-game, and we'll get into it all there. That's also where I'll be setting up mailbag kind of episodes. But this backstretch of the Florida Gator season is rough. And it's not just rough because, oh, your opponents are tough. It's that your opponents are tough, but you're heading on the road for 2 of those 3 games. And it's of the last 3 games, it's the first 2 games that are on the road. So you've got to go into Baton Rouge, which I don't care how much anyone hates LSU. I don't even care how bad of an LSU team we could be looking at in any given year. It is really difficult for me to look at any game where you have to head into Baton Rouge and go, that's a win. Can't do it. So, not that you can't win, but I can't look at it this way ahead and go, oh, yeah, that's a win. Then you got to play Missouri on the road. Mizzou's having a pretty damn good year. We'll talk about that more in a second. But then you come home and you have to play Florida State. It's also important to acknowledge, or at least I think it's important to acknowledge, that we will learn a lot more about all of these teams involved. And there's almost definitely, knock on wood, but there's almost definitely going to be injuries that will impact this game for all sides. For Florida, for LSU, Missouri, Florida State, Arkansas, for everybody. I mean, we've already seen it with Georgia. They just lost Brock Bowers. So we'll see that all throughout. So yeah, things are going to change from right now when we're talking about this. The LSU game, I would expect to be pretty high scoring. Not that Florida's this amazing offensive team right now, or this amazing offensive program. LSU's defense, oh my God, they've been so bad this year. Like, I don't mean just like, oh, wow, they're underwhelming. I mean, geez, they have straight up sucked at times. Like, for a team that had playoff hopes, with a defense like that, I just don't see it at all. Like, it's just been bad for them. So say that. And also looking at how explosive their offense can be, especially when you look at someone like Jaden Daniels. Like, his rushing ability with this Florida Gators pass rush, that they generate a lot of pressures, not a ton of sacks, but there tends to be rushing lanes for scramble opportunities lately. If you don't fix that by the LSU game, Jaden Daniels is going to have an even better game than he had last season. Because he had a pretty damn good game last year. But if you're being aggressive, like, you got to be aggressive, I think, but you also have to be smart about things, which is where you really get into trouble with players like Jaden Daniels, because you have to be aggressive, but smart enough and in position successfully, consistently. But that game should be a doozy. Okay, like it should be fun to watch regardless. And by fun, I mean your heart's going to be starting and stopping incessantly. But that's what Florida Gators football is. So we're going to have fun with that. Then you look at the Missouri game immediately after that. I want to make this one clear. If you watched or listened last year, you know that I was telling people before the Florida Gators played Missouri Tigers, Brady Cook's a pretty damn good quarterback. He was very underrated last year going into the Florida game, and he's underrated now. He's had a strong start, and people are coming around to him, but he's still underrated. He's better this year significantly than he was last year. So I think that when we're looking at the Missouri game, that's one of the toughest things about looking at the remainder of the schedule is when you look at Arkansas, for example, from last segment, KJ Jefferson is a dude. Like, he's playing well. The rest of the team is not, but he's playing well. You look at LSU. Jaden Daniels is a dude. now. He sucked at Arizona State, but he's a dude now. Looked at Missouri. Brady Cook. He was underrated last year. He's looking better this year. Looking pretty damn solid this year. Then you look at Florida State, and Jordan Travis has had some great games against the Florida Gators. Like, Florida State has an absolute squad, okay? They're undefeated at this point. They've had quite a few close calls, and two things about that. One, they've had quite a few close calls that they shouldn't have, given how experienced their roster is. You would think they'd be a little bit more consistent. But two, they've had quite a few close calls, and I feel like when a team has a lot of close calls, you look at them as eventually you're going to slip up. When you have a close call against Boston College and like Clemson, you should have handled. Okay? And those didn't happen. So I think that when you look at that team, like, they were still one of the better rosters in college football, but I feel like they're underperforming a little bit. That's just me. And I was someone who, at the start of the year, I had them in the Locked On Top 25 poll. I had them as like number 3 in the country. I feel like they're underperforming, even though their record's great. Yeah, sure. You shouldn't be in as many heart stoppers as you are in. So for me, that's what I'm looking at. But I think that the Florida Gators are going to have a rough final 3 games, and I don't think that's fair weather fanish. I don't think that's pessimistic or doom and gloom to say. It's just you got a hell of a schedule to wrap up this year. But again, Florida should be bowl eligible with a win over Arkansas, and I think you've got a decent chance of winning one of your final 3 games. Missouri's the most likely of the 3, but also when you look at Florida State, like I mentioned with Baton Rouge, it's hard to go into Baton Rouge and win a game, and it's hard for me to say, hey, when a team goes into Baton Rouge, I have a very hard time going, that's a win for the other team. That's a win for the away team. It's the same crap with the Swamp. It's very hard for me to look. I don't care how good Florida State is, and if the Georgia game was in Gainesville, I would say the same thing. It's very hard for me to just chalk up a win for the opposing team when they have to come to Gainesville. Especially when you look at that Florida State game and it's the rivalry and it's the last home game of the season and it's the last game of the regular season, crowd's going to show up. So I think that when we look at that one, Florida should win one of these final 3 games. Or Florida has a solid shot of winning one of these final 3 games. I don't want to say should, as if that'd be a disappointment if they didn't. From a realistic standpoint, from a fan standpoint, yeah, it'd be disappointing. But from a realist standpoint, wouldn't be. But thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day, we are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast. We are going to try to be back tomorrow to talk LJ McCray before his commitment. Going to try to get Brian Smith, Locked On's recruiting insider, there. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Whole 9 Sports, Giants Country, NFL 33, and I'll see you all tomorrow.